I am Dracula. I bid you welcome.
Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Thou shalt rise again.
Power to make multitudes run squealing in terror at the touch of my little invisible finger.
Do you believe in werewolves? To a new world of gods and monsters.
Welcome, everyone, back to Ken and I's retrospective on the Universal Monsters box set. Ken, what movie are we up to today?
We are talking about Werewolf of London, which I would contest might be, as of all that I've seen, might be the most underappreciated of all these movies.
It's the first one I've watched so far that this was my first time watching it, and I've never heard a single person talk about or review this film before. So it was awesome actually going into a movie like 100% blind, no trailer, no knowledge of anything other than the title Werewolf of London, where I was like, oh, it's got a werewolf and it's in London. Other than that, I had no idea what this was about. So that's what made this the most fun. And I brought this up actually when you and I were texting after it. If you've seen American Werewolf in London, then I'm not going to say that movie stole from this, but this movie heavily, I'd say, inspired that film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a couple of things that I want to talk about regarding this movie. The makeup is very different from the iconic Wolfman that we all know.
Mm-hmm. It's still there though. Like you can still, it's almost like the wolf design of this film was like a prototype to the Wolfman.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Like the teeth had a similar look. It just wasn't, the teeth had a similar look.
The underbite.
Yeah. It had a similar enough design, but they're still far enough apart from each other that like the Wolfman doesn't feel like it was like a long lost sequel to this or something.
Yeah. And as far as the makeup goes, so one thing I know I texted you about this, one thing that I think is really neat about it is the way the transformation is done. Now in the Wolfman, we all know they just sort of like, would like shoot Lon Chaney Jr.'s face, add some makeup, shoot that, add some more makeup, shoot that, and just sort of cross dissolve the frames together. In this, what they do instead is like he's sort of like walking in the city streets. He'll like pass behind a tree, he's got a little more makeup. He'll pass behind a pillar, a little more makeup. It's a cheap effect just to like make it so they can do this, but I actually think it works better.
I liked it, and there was another spot where he was sitting when he was starting to transform and the camera panned down, and then I could see it as the camera started panning up. I could see the cut, and then it came back up and his face was transformed more, and I was like, it still looks good though.
Yeah, honestly, when I was a kid I liked it, but as an adult, when I look at those just cross dissolves of like the face changing, I don't think a person would sit completely still as they're turning into a werewolf. Geez.
No, imagine how long that would take.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
Like a day to do that, hours. Your whole shooting day goes to just, hey, Lon Chaney Jr., just you show up today and the makeup team.
Yeah,
we don't need anybody else.
Also, that's what John Landis said when he made an American Werewolf in London. He's like, see, I don't imagine that's how you would turn into a werewolf. I would imagine it would be a very painful process of your bones restructuring and turning into a werewolf.
And the way he did it, he made that extremely painful looking in his movie.
Oh, yeah. Now, I apologize. You had mentioned how much you think this movie influenced American Werewolf in London, and I feel like I just totally passed by that.
Oh, no, you're good. What did you see that? What similarities did you see?
What's so funny is I'm sort of blanking. What specifics do you have?
Travel to a strange land and attacked.
Yeah.
Takes place in London, obviously.
Obviously, yeah.
The transformation and attacks around the city.
Oh, and also sort of being shot by a policeman and then dying with his loved one right there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, like we said, it's not American Werewolf in London is not a remake of this film, but it definitely was inspired by ideas from this film.
Yeah, that's a movie we should put into sort of our grab bag at the end of this because I love that movie.
Oh, absolutely. That's an amazing film. I love watching that movie. And I know you love the director.
Well, I love his work. I think he's a horrible person, but
but no, so I think I asked you about this and it was more of a rhetorical, opinionated question. Why do you think this didn't catch on? And why do you think like it was the Wolfman that's in pop culture and not this one?
if I'm honest, I think it's probably, I mean, genuinely, we'll
The
talk
main
about
lead?
Wolfman when we get to it. But when we get to Wolfman, we'll talk about it. I think the Wolfman is just a better made film.
Yeah.
I do think so. Henry Hull in this movie, I do like him. I think he's pretty interesting. It's just he's not as compelling as Lawrence Talbot, and overall, yeah, it's just not as compelling as that movie. And I think, like we talked before, these movies back then, you didn't have home video, so the movies didn't always stick in your mind after you would see them. Well, they would, but you know what I'm saying? Like they're not immediately available to you. And I think The Wolfman just being a better made film, and all these years later when they made all these, home video ways of watching movies, that was just the one that stuck out in people's mind.
Which is, I mean, I like both, don't get me wrong. And we'll obviously go into Wolfman later, but it's like, I almost want a remake of this one because I genuinely thought there was a lot of ideas in here that just were not expanded on. Like, I almost wanted more of, I almost wish they'd left it a mystery who was stealing the parts of the flower, maybe. I felt like they focused on Wilfred's issues with his wife, but it still didn't feel deep enough because one, he looked like 20 years older than his wife, Lisa.
That's true.
You didn't tell me they were married. I would have thought that was father and daughter.
Also, yeah. I was thinking about that. I do think the movie gets emotional at the end because, he has no time for he's so consumed with his experiments. But really, it's at the ending when he dies, like his final words being, "I'm sorry, I couldn't make you happier." That's heartbreaking, but I do think they could have done more with it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. There was a lot in this movie that it's like it didn't feel properly executed, and I feel if it had been, this movie really could have been remembered more. And I don't want it to sound to anyone listening like we're doing that making excuses for a film thing, because I don't like doing that. But it's like I see all this potential sitting there that they just didn't take full advantage of, like Lisa and Paul hanging out the whole movie. I can kind of understand. I kind of can't see why she's hanging out with him. She's angry at her husband for neglecting her, but it's like, this man is clearly in love with you. Like you should. And then, no, me and my husband, we still love each other. And it's like, well, then stop hanging out with this man who's like, basically fawning all over you.
Absolutely. That moment when they just sort of walk off and just sort of blow him off, and he's like there at the gates just like, "Lisa, where are you going?" And that's rough. It's just like, I will say that's something that the movie does well. It makes you invested in their relationship. So something I wanted to ask about, I sort of got the sense that this movie, not entirely, but almost took a more scientific approach to werewolves, whereas the Wolfman took a more mystical approach.
Yeah, because in the Wolfman, it was more of, like you said, mysticism and magic. Whereas this one, like that, it's the flower that keeps the transformation itself at bay.
Also, I like the term werewolfery. Like it's a disease, and Dr. Yagami, played by Warner Oland, um, and I know he says this line, and I told you it's one of my favorite lines, really, in any Universal monster movie, when he says, "The werewolf is neither man nor wolf, but a satanic creature with the worst qualities of both." That's one of my favorite lines, like in any Universal monster movie.
Yeah, and that definitely adds to the type of werewolf that Wilfred became. I mean, the way the creature was portrayed in this film was felt completely different than
And the Wolfman.
the Wolfman. Like night and day almost. Night and day. Wolf at night. Um, but yeah, it was like, I mean, and like even in his design, like in the Wolfman, I'm sure if we'll just say the ratings board wasn't what they were, I'm sure they would have had him butt ass naked.
Right.
Because that's just what it was. He was more animal than man, and the clothes were probably only kept on due to just the way censorship was back then.
Right.
But the way Wilfred was in this, I thought it was very interesting. Like he kept his cap on, he had his cloak, which like he doubled as a cape, and it's like he had a look at like the first attack he did in the city. He like to that random woman where it's like he was like a prowler. He's like standing in the corner and she sees him, and he just like flings the cape out and chases her down. And I did like that scene. Chases her down screaming as it fades to black.
Yeah, that's something I think these old movies really get is, and that's almost more scary, more effective than like showing someone ripped to shreds.
And gore is not scary.
No, it's not. It's just gross. And I will say, and I think his werewolf is almost more of like a Jekyll and Hyde sort of thing than a full-on werewolf.
Yeah, because he's still, and even that at the end when he speaks, you can tell that there's more intelligence to him than the Wolfman had.
Yeah, like he's more conscious of what he's doing.
Yeah, and like there's more of like that, the driving force as a demonic creature. And like they said, his target will be what he loves the most.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was never around his wife until the end.
Yeah, I really love a scene that I think is pretty heartbreaking is when, and I know you love the two old ladies that are in this movie, and we can talk about them, but when the one old lady takes him up to his room and he like locks himself in the room and he starts praying. He's like, "God, don't let this happen to me. But if it should happen to me, keep me away from her."
Mm-hmm.
That's heartbreaking.
That's agreed. He's a very tortured soul who, like that, he loves his wife, but he's also scared of what's happening and he doesn't know how to explain it to her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I did love that at the end. About the end too. It's like saying goodbye. He dies. I do love how the cop was able to give him his dignity as he was gone. He's like, we'll say, he was shot trying to protect her or something.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great ending to that movie, I thought. So going back to what I was saying about like the werewolfery being a little more like scientific in this one, I thought it was interesting that they have this flower that grows in moonlight, and he creates this machine that emulates moonlight, and when he puts his hand within the lighting of that machine, it starts to turn hairy and wolf-like.
Mm-hmm.
Thought that was an interesting way that it's actually like being in the light of the moon is actually what turns you into a werewolf, not just the mysticism of it being the full night or full moon night.
Yeah, that's where it's like I would almost think a remake would be really cool.
Yeah,
because I'd like to see more of that. Because again, like some of these older ones, like we've said, they do a lot, and some of it's just like missed when it's filming. Like we talked about in Dracula, like it felt like there was just missing scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of felt the same with this. Like, okay, like not necessarily a missing scene, but it felt like it wasn't fully elaborated on and fully explained.
Yeah. So a person I want to ask about, Warner Oland playing Dr. Yagami. I mean, there's the issues of a white actor playing a Japanese character. It was the 30s. And I think that's something to keep in mind. But what did you think of him as a character?
I was intrigued by him, and I could tell his desperation when he stole the flowers.
Mm-hmm.
But he also knew what was going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, look, can't you like split the flower or something? Like, can't you try that?
Like, I understand that there's no way to make Wilfred believe this until he actually experiences it. But it's like, he's a scientist. They're intrigued by tests and experiments. You should have been able to talk him into, like, strap me down, watch what happens. And then as soon as he starts, quick, put it on me and watch what happens or something.
Right.
So it's like, I like the character. He's just kind of a scumbag.
yeah, I thought that too. It's especially upon this rewatch, I was like, wow, are you seriously like he really screws the guy over a lot of the time.
And got them both killed.
Yeah. I'll say this one scene I kind of wish could have been in this. Now the 2010 remake of The Wolfman, problems as it has, one of my favorite scenes in that movie is just the battle between the two wolves. And I wish we could have seen like a 1930s version of that in this movie.
Oh, that would have been cool. This
would
would have been
been
the first Monster versus movie, Wolf versus Wolf.
Could have been cool. As many problems as the 2010 Wolfman has,
which it has a lot.
It does. I think that's a pretty cool scene.
Yeah, I mean, I still like the film, but it's got problems. It's not as good as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or Bram Stoker's Dracula, but it was a good attempt. It was a good attempt.
Yeah.
This was better.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I think Werewolf of London, I remember I was on a friend's podcast, Cobwebs, and we were talking about Frankenstein and Victor Frankenstein. But at the end of that, he asked me if I thought there were any specific Universal monster movies that I think are underrated. I called this one out.
Very nice. So I think the other one I saw on the same disc is it She-Wolf of London?
Yeah, there's one called She-Wolf of London. I haven't seen that one.
Okay, I was going to ask, is it like a spiritual sequel? But I guess we'll find out when we get to it, which I think that one, I don't know how far off that one is.
I don't know, but I do believe that our friend Bill in the group or in the Facebook group that we're in, he was talking about how apparently in that one there is no werewolf. Like, it's left psychological, and you don't know if the lady is going crazy or if she's really turning into a werewolf. And I think that'll be an interesting angle.
Okay, so it's kind of like what's it, Cat People or something?
Yeah.
Okay,
and that's actually how the original The Wolfman was supposed to be, apparently.
Huh.
Yeah, and we can talk about that more when we review that movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm good on Bill. Good on Bill for having seen it before we have.
Yeah, right.
I love talking movies with Bill. For anyone out there, our friend Bill, he is like the most positive, uplifting guy in the world. He likes almost every movie because he just has a good time watching what he loves. I love talking film with him.
Yeah. Definitely an upbeat guy.
100%. So let's talk the two best characters of the film. What was it? It's Mrs. Whack and Mrs. Moncaster.
Yeah. The two of them just like being drunken old ladies bantering, and specifically one when she's like drunkenly taking Wilfred up to his room, and he's like, "What would you say if I told you it was possible for a man to turn into a werewolf?" She's like, "I'd say I was Little Red Riding Hood."
I love when they were like both sitting there drunk in the pub, and the one dude's like, "Someone's looking for a room," and the one like knocks the other one out or something.
She just punches her in the face and knocks her out.
Oh, that was beautiful. I mean, because you don't see it coming at all. These are just two drunk women. And then just like every scene they're in for the rest of the movie is like absolutely comedic. Like they're just sitting there trying to figure out what's happening, and they're screaming, and they're great. It's like that's the kind of humor I like in a movie, where they just like alleviate the scene, give you a second to breathe, have a good time before getting back into the heavy bits of the story.
Yeah, I'll say this: these two were much better than the comic relief cops in Halloween 5.
Oh. Speaking of that, which comic relief cops were worse? The two in Halloween 5 or the two in the original Last House on the Left? Because Last House on the Left, they were in the wrong movie.
They were totally in the wrong movie. Halloween 5, I have to say, just because Halloween 5 is just the worst movie between that and Last House on the Left. So that probably just taints them for me.
Yeah, it's true. But I personally don't have much left to say about this other than I kind of, now call me crazy on this one. Do you think the original Fly took any inspiration from this?
Could be. I think
like
the Fly,
keeping the transformation a secret.
it could
Like
be.
not directly, like not like we're saying like, oh, they ripped it off, but like, do you think it got some idea like don't let the wife see the strained relationship?
It could be. I mean, that makes total sense to me. But yeah, I don't know. But that's an interesting connection.
We need to talk about that movie at some point too.
Oh yeah, I love the original The Fly. I think it's very overshadowed by the remake, which I love.
Oh, that movie's amazing.
So damn good.
But
so
yeah, we have so many movies to talk about when we finish this box set. Yeah, I don't have a ton left to say about this movie other than I think it just had a lot of potential that didn't live up to. And it's probably the first one we've talked about that I wouldn't say like is a must see on the same level as Frankenstein and like Bride and Invisible Man. It's still good. I mean, if you're making your way through the box set, definitely watch it. If you'd like to see, what Universal put out before the Wolfman, definitely go for it. But in some ways, I think it's superior to the Wolfman. But in other ways, I can see why the Wolfman is remembered more.
I'll say this. I do think the movie's underrated. But I also don't think it's mandatory watching. I think for people who, want to check out, the older monster movies, this one isn't mandatory. You got to check out Dracula, Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, The Wolfman. You got to check those out. But if you're a big monster fan and you already love those and you want to delve into the lesser known ones, check this one out.
Absolutely. So that wraps up another episode. Ken, thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, guys, that wraps it up. We will be back soon with the next review.